Mother Teresa said that we'll never know that Jesus is all we need until Jesus is all we have. And unfortunately, there's in people with people who have access to a lot of their basic material needs being covered and sorted out. There's not that many opportunities that we have to be able to acknowledge that Jesus is all we need, because we tend to have our provision taken care of.
Alright, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's been a while since we've posted, but I'm here in South Africa. Pretty blessed to be here. Lots of cool stories to come and episodes containing stories from things that have happened here. But today I'm here with Kyle, and this is an amazing man of God that I've met through my friend Kirsty. He is her older brother. So it's an honor having you on. You just got married. Well, you've been married for, we'll get into the details, but there's some cool things happening in your life.
Yeah.
And you've really inspired me as far as like just your legacy already and where you're at. And I think it's really cool. So I think we'll kind of start out with your story, where you come from, who you are, and then we'll dive a little bit more into some more detailed questions. And then, yeah, we'll see where it takes us. So
Thanks,
I'll
bro.
leave you to it.
Yeah, honored to be here. Great to hear what's happening in the few podcasts that I've got to listen to up to now. I've really enjoyed. So thanks for having me on. My story. So I always find this a bit of an interesting question, and I think we really tailor our answer to the question depending on sort of the audience around us, right?
Yeah.
So I'll try and do that and not do that at the same time. So to answer the question without also just giving, I guess, information that's generic. I guess who I am starts with probably a huge amount of blessing before I took my first breath. Born into an amazing family. My mum and dad were both born and raised in South Africa. In the context of the rest of South African society, fairly middle class to sort of upper income families comparatively, both white South Africans, which already made me very high on the privilege spectrum. Sorry, my dog's just running away. Falafel. Yeah, so grew up in a home where I had an amazing example and two parents who loved Jesus and allowed that to inform their parenting. And I think that was probably the most significant part of my upbringing, those two facts, having a lot of privilege on my side and having parents that loved me very dearly and allowed Jesus to guide them through parenting.
Yeah. I have a quick question from
Sure.
there. So, I mean, I had a similar upbringing as far as like I was very blessed with the parents I had and the place I grew up in. And oftentimes I think like, why me? Why do I get that? Why do I get those, seemingly unfair advantages and blessings? And sometimes, almost kind of evokes a sense of I need to do more maybe, or I need to, do certain things. How do you like approach that? And like when you see someone that grew up in a family that maybe is similar to you, but just started so much lower, and as a result of that has a much different life.
Yeah. So I think, it's a complex question. I guess to touch on a summary of some of my thoughts around this topic. Firstly, I'll say that I think for many years this was the central part of what I felt God leading me through, especially in terms of making sense of my context. Because while we may have been born into a similar context in terms of middle to upper class families comparative to those around us, the stark difference is that I was born in the most unequal society in the world, and so the level of the difference I think is in South Africa is very, very big, and that also is on stark display at every street corner. It's something that's a lot more confronting, that you can't get away from, and that I think is really important to try and intentionally make sense of. Otherwise, you just naturally drift towards apathy. So I'd say that this was when I came to what I would call really stepping into self-realization and self-actualization in my faith, trying to really make sense of myself as a and sort of a young adult, trying to form an authentic relationship with Jesus. This was one of the very big topics that I was wrestling with for a very long time. And I think that, firstly, there's a couple of things I've observed. We assume in societies that come from a westernized worldview that the way to happiness is upward mobility, and so everything around us is pointing towards a roadmap towards success and happiness that's based on trying to accumulate more wealth, status, experience, to get to a higher platform, which will amount to high happiness. And I think Jesus in his life models downward mobility, not upward mobility. And then there's these really difficult teachings that we see throughout Scripture that make it very difficult to reconcile an upward mobility to the kingdom that we're called to embody and embrace, and that's that it's more blessed to give than to receive. And there's obviously numerous teachings throughout the Old and New Testament on warning on how money is something that can be a very unhelpful distraction. Jesus himself saying that it's easier to thread a camel through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. So I think in a lot of ways, it first came to me acknowledging that actually what seems like a huge blessing, or what is a huge blessing, is not necessarily a blessing in the way that I might have thought it to have been at first. And actually this can be something that might be the biggest challenge in my spiritual maturity. And then secondly, I think when I was praying through that in that season, what I felt naturally happen was Jesus lead me into these moments of proximity with people that were different to me, with people that were far less privileged along certain metric lines than I was. And there I discovered what I would reference as the divine exchange, where dealing with people in stark poverty, who literally are reliant on God's provision for their day-to-day basic human needs. There we as people of affluence have the opportunity to save the poor from their poverty, which is a wonderful thing, and it being more blessed to give than to receive means that there's a lot of joy in that, and in being able to see how we can use the excess that we have in our resources to bless another person. That was wonderfully fulfilling. But this weird second arm of that exchange took me by surprise, and that was the poor saving the rich from their affluence. And in a lot of ways, we're as dependent as they are on that exchange happening in that way. The difference is, what they receive is answer to material needs, and if those don't come through, they die. But we know that this is the limited side of eternity. Our requirements and needs from that exchange pertain to the eternal, and that's pretty significant. And so, I that's as much of a summarized view on the topic as I guess I can give.
I mean, no, that's really cool, because just being in South Africa and in more impoverished places, you can see almost a sense of maturity from people that have nothing in this world, but they have Jesus, and you see a sense of just joy that is not gained from the things that usually you would think people get joy from, at least in the Western world.
Absolutely.
Which, it is a blessing.
Yeah.
I guess there's the other side of it though. We were born into a Christian family, and so I sometimes think, okay, if I was born into a Muslim family, I'm maybe Muslim right now, or a Hindu family, how do you look at that? Because just being born into a Christian family, I think, is the biggest blessing that we have received, as far as
Absolutely.
being born into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd say more than just, being born into a family that identifies as Christian is one thing. Being born into a family
that lives it out.
Yeah, with two parents who actively follow Jesus, that is an entirely different thing. And so, it is, it's one of those, and I think that comes back to the story of grace, right? Is that we're so undeserving of God's grace for us, and I think we get these little moments of being able to glimpse that. And I'll always say that my biggest material possession, or has been being able to be born into the family that I was, and there's no way around that. It's, I my whole worldview, my understanding was so fundamentally shaped by how well it was modeled, and my parents became surrogate Christian parents to most of my close friends who either didn't have any Christian parents, or who had Christian parents who weren't actively pursuing Jesus the same as they were. So
Which oftentimes can be more of a downfall than like them claiming to be Christian and living a different way.
absolutely, yeah, not being modeled well. I mean, we're all human, but yeah. I mean, it's remarkable. What's interesting is I still, in spite having what I'd call the best parents in the world, from like I literally couldn't ask for more, still rejected the faith of my childhood early in my high school years. Um, and yeah, that was just like a conscious decision. I think I can remember from a very young age being quite a thoughtful child. I had this existential crisis moment at the tender age of like 9 or something, where I just remember just wrestling with the concept of death, and at that stage I thought heaven was, it seemed like more of an opiate for the poor, something that, like, seemed like it was just a lofty ideal to try and distract us from the fear of what would come afterwards. And I sort of rejected that idea because I couldn't, I didn't have any, hadn't had any tangible experiences with God, and just sort of didn't, had to distance myself from what I was seeing in Sunday school and modeled by my parents. And I remember thinking, if there's not heaven, then there's just going to be this nothingness. And I just imagined like what it must be like if I closed my eyes and couldn't move my body. And I was like, this is
terrifying.
This is what it's going to be like. Yeah. I think I was already had started wrestling with stuff from quite a young age. And when I was about 14, I made a conscious effort to say, I'm going to explore some of the other more attractive offerings that materialistic society have, and that's the allure of that seemed much more appealing. So I rejected. So yeah. Coming back to that, I mean, I still look at how even if you are the most intentional person in the world, when it comes to raising a child, it speaks to the fact that we're still reliant on God's grace for the salvation of our children as well.
That is one of the mind-blowing things when you read the Bible. You see parents like Eli. I mean, some of the greatest, what you would think would be the best parents in the world, and their kids are absolutely just...
Yeah, absolutely.
like,
yeah. Yeah, no, it's. I mean, parenthood scares me a lot. So, yeah, sure.
Okay, so, I mean, your childhood wasn't necessarily just sunshine and rainbows, obviously. Like, no one's childhood really is, to certain points. Maybe go into a little bit more of the type of school you went to, how that maybe shaped you, and then I'd love to hear a little bit more about when you said you did kind of stray from your family's faith. Does that mean you didn't believe in Jesus anymore, or does that believe you just didn't believe in some of the other concepts that your family taught you?
Yeah. So yeah, I was raised in Johannesburg at first, which is quite a fast-paced city, and my parents, when I was about 11, decided that they wanted to give myself and my siblings a better environment to grow up in. So we moved down to a small little town called Hilton in KwaZulu-Natal, close to the coast, which at that stage I thought was devastating towards my social prospects because, yeah, it just seemed like there were much fewer people and much less to do. And in hindsight was also another massive blessing. So
And that's where we are right now, by the way.
that's where we are right now. The video is also rolling, so I forget about that. So yeah, you can see behind us a little bit. It's very beautiful green little part of the world. But so was at an all boys private school in Johannesburg. Came to a co-ed or a mixed boy and girl school for the last 3 years of my junior school down here in KwaZulu-Natal, and then in my high school. So our high school for us runs from year 8 to year 12, as opposed to year 9 to 12 for you guys. And I was fortunate enough to be offered a scholarship to a very prestigious all boys boarding school that is about 10 minutes from my home, but you still have to board, which means you have to stay at the school, and you're allowed to come home for a sort of 3 weekends every quarter. So that was another amazing opportunity that I was offered, and my parents were not so keen on the idea because I think they identified that it meant that they'd have less of an ongoing role in my life from a day-to-day basis. But it was very clear that God was opening a door there, and I was really keen on the idea. And it's I mean, not that it necessarily means anything, but it's the most expensive school in the country, which in a very unequal society means that you're exposed to the sort of upper 0.1% of an already very wide spectrum.
Mm.
And so
What did you get the scholarship for? Was it sports or?
it was academics. At that stage, I thought I was put on this world to play rugby, and so I didn't like the idea of needing to perform academically to maintain a scholarship. Although it didn't really work like that. You didn't have to meet any performance metrics once you were given it. But
Okay.
yeah, I was my sport was my big passion at the time.
So which was rugby or was
It
it
was
multiple
rugby.
sports?
I mean, I played a lot of sports, but rugby
Okay.
was what I enjoyed the most.
Yeah.
Yeah, but then so that was from year eight. I was living 10 minutes down the road, but was being essentially raised on a day-to-day basis by the matrics or the year 12s, who were sort of the guys running our dorm, and that was yeah, a very interesting experience. I think the micro society of the school was retrospectively like very, very dangerous in a lot of ways, because yeah, no 18-year-old should be raising children, and they didn't see it that way either. So yeah, but that was, I guess, the environment, and a lot of yeah, just unfettered wealth, just huge amounts of money thrown at trying to raise children by successful parents who didn't have the time to be actively involved in their children's life. And that's not everybody. There were some amazing parents in spite of their hugely worldly success, but there was a lot of that thrown into the mix. And so I think at the tender age of 13 or 14, it just, the allure of money seemed to be something that was far more attractive than following Jesus. And my parents, yeah, we they were very, very intentional about allowing us to have opportunities to contextualize our wealth. And so our Christmas tradition would be to go into impoverished areas, and the money that we would have otherwise spent on buying presents for other people and having presents bought for us, we'd take and they'd take us to the shops to buy food. They'd get us involved with making the food, and we'd go and play games. I played violin at the time, so I'd play violin for people, and we'd go and share a Christmas meal, a very basic Christmas meal, with people who couldn't afford to have one. So I think there was a lot of moments of that which retrospectively were enormous. I mean, pivotal. So grateful for. But when I was, at the age of 14, and I'm seeing that this is what my parents did with our money, and these guys got to have, the new PlayStation every year or Xbox or whatever else, and so that world seemed more more appealing to me at that stage. And so I think at that stage, my deconstruction of my faith was a complete deconstruction of faith. I hadn't had an experience that had made my faith my own. And so I'd already had a lot of doubt around the validity of the claims of the Christian worldview, although obviously I didn't call it that as a 14-year-old, but it just didn't seem real to me. And it just seemed like I'd get a lot more happiness out of, just living like other people lived rather than how my parents lived. And so I guess I, in some ways, slowly drifted towards a more materialistic offering in life, and in other ways, also just decided that I was going to stop going to sort of the youth group that was on offer at the school, and a few things like that. And so that was for my grade 8 year. Was in a luckily a small and somewhat sheltered way experimenting with just some of the lifestyle aspects that I saw people around me partaking in, and feeling like I wanted more. So that was luckily it didn't get very far. And at the end of my year 8 year, I myself and one of my good childhood friends who was at a similar school to me, we saw this advert for what was a holiday camp, which was a essentially a Christian based just time away in the Drakensberg, which is this mountain range here, not dissimilar from your guys' summer camps.
Yeah.
This was like a year long, a week long experience, and in all the videos that we saw, we realized that the ratio of girls to guys was probably about 1 to 10, and so we were like, that's going to be a good place to go. And
I think the sad reality is that's why most boys do go to summer camps.
well, listen, I mean, yeah, full transparency here. There was no shame for us. We were very open about our intentions. But I realized when I was there, I mean, having grown up in Sunday school, it was very easy for me to answer the questions and paint myself to be a sort of person that was that fitted in with that crowd, and that gained me some sort of social currency and capital there. And
As far as fitting in with the Christian crowd?
the Christian crowd, yeah, and being able to impress people with my apparent knowledge of the Bible at that stage, and again, all for ulterior motives of trying to but I really had a bit of an issue with that, I think, because it felt inauthentic, and I was deciding over the course of that week that I needed to formalize my commitment to moving away from Christianity. And so on the second last night of the camp, there was, another worship evening, and I just felt quite guilty. And I thought, okay, well, I prayed a prayer that I prayed a number of times when I think I was searching for God to reveal himself to me. And I said, Lord, if you're real, then do something, and do something that, that makes me not be able to question you. I read throughout the context of Scripture that you've revealed yourself to people in these remarkable ways, and that's we're taught that's still who you are. And so if there's any semblance of truth in any of this, then whether it's making that painting fall off the wall, or or suddenly bringing a storm and striking, massive bolt of lightning to that tree, do something that makes me not be able to question that you're here, or fill me with just a sense of like rapid emotional waterfall, whatever the case is. I've seen other people claim to have these experiences. I've never had this. This is your last chance. Otherwise, I'm hanging it up, and
Wow.
I'm going to more fruitful pastures. And
Dang.
yeah, I know that at the moment there was an offering to prayer, and I went up and just asked for prayer, and it was someone who I hadn't met before, and I didn't give any details of what I was wanting prayer for, and I had very low expectations. I thought this was just going to be the end of a season. And as I was sort of standing there with my hands open, thinking these thoughts, the guy who was praying for me, who's since become somewhat of a friend, but amazing example of a man. His name was Paul, and Paul stopped and looked me dead in the eye. And Paul has these almost translucent, like green-gray eyes, and so in a dull lit room, they seem to be almost luminescent.
How old is Paul?
Paul is probably about 10 to 15 years older than me.
Okay.
So at that stage was probably about 35 or so, or no, maybe, yeah, probably about that. Maybe he's a bit older than that. But he stopped and he looked me dead in the eye, and because he stopped, I opened my eyes as well. And I hadn't said anything to him, and he said he got a sense that God was sort of revealing to him that I was looking for a sense of proof, and that I was looking for some sort of emotional or physical experience. And I'd said nothing to this guy. So at this stage, I'm like, I'm speechless. I'm already like, wow, okay, this is a crazy coincidence, if it is a coincidence. And he just said that he felt that God was wanting to take me on an experience that was much deeper than anything that was purely emotional or physical, and was wanting to just awaken me a sense of the spiritual reality. And I was completely speechless, and he prayed a little bit more, and then he just said he thinks I should just go outside, and just give the Lord an opportunity to just minister to me. And so So I did that. I went outside, and I mean, by that stage, I'd like the rest of the room had tunneled out. I was so captivated by what had just happened, and I wouldn't say expectant because I was more shocked than anything else. And I went and I just lay on the ground outside, and it was a clear night in the Drakensberg, so there's no light pollution, so a full sky of stars, and I had what was still to this day one of the most profound experiences of my life, where suddenly it wasn't quite an out of body experience, but suddenly it was like I was looking at these stars, and I just started feeling like almost the camera was reversed. I didn't see myself, but I suddenly started to become aware of myself in reference to the the sky full of stars, and I started to become aware of my insignificance and how small that I was. And it was like this almost, if you have that moment of zooming out of the earth as you sort of move into the solar system, and it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller, and it felt like that was happening to me. And then there was a point where I clearly felt the love of God just not in like a physical or an emotional way. That was why it was so difficult, so different to what I experienced. But I felt myself coming to an awareness of the love of God, and an awareness of how, in the midst of my insignificance, God, there was such significance in the fact that God knew me by name, and I felt God affirm that to me, saying, like, my child, I know you. And it wasn't an audible voice in my head, but it was an awareness of God's awareness of me, and the creator of all of this had taken some form of interest in me, and that just felt like my first experience with grace. And so that was profound.
Wow.
And I could never question God after that, but I didn't follow him. I didn't know what to do. And it was only 6 months later at another similar camp, the following June or July, that I guess I re-picked that up and had a week of really trying to explore what this would look like in terms of my life, that I felt like I became a follower of Jesus after that. So,
Wow.
yeah.
So, okay, you're a follower of Jesus now, and we're growing into that.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened? What does life look like as a follower of Jesus when like that happened? Did you feel a calling to certain things, or I don't know.
Yeah. So at that stage, what was difficult is, for that 6 months before that point, I was sort of trapped in limbo, because now I'd stepped into certain friendships and into taking on a certain persona in the broader context of like the group that I was in, where I had the physical attributes and the sporting talent, the academic prowess, whatever it was, to sort of be seen as someone who was popular, and with that came access to status and just these opportunities to have these fun weekends, what I thought. And so that was what I, during my prior to that experience, had sort of started moving more into, and sort of climbing that social ladder. And then that was based off of the assumption that God wasn't real, so let me just lead into all this stuff. And then it got to the point where I was like, well, now I do think that God's real, but also this is quite a fun ladder to climb, and I'm enjoying what this is giving me. And so there was sort of 6 months of both of those going on, where I was like, I'm still just going to pursue these material things, and but I'm going to try and, I don't know, I'm not going to think about this whole God thing because I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And so I think when that second week came along, I also happened to be there by chance. I wasn't planning on, but a good friend at the time. At that stage, I realized, in my dorm, which was the year group in my house, and there were 120 boys in each year, and they were divided into 7 different houses, like boarding houses. And so you spent the most time with the sort of 16 guys that you were living with. And in my group of the guys I was living with in my house, there wasn't another Christian, or not someone who was actively, living out their faith, or they're probably people that would claim to believe in God, but there was nobody who was taking a stand for God in that context. And so I just knew from the beginning, I was like, I'm dead in the water if I try to do anything here, social suicide, but also, there's no one to walk with. So the only prayer I think I'd prayed before that was, Lord, if I'm supposed to do something about this experience, I was supposed to live in a different way, then give me people to walk this road with.
Oh,
And
nice.
then there was a guy who really used to irritate me. He was a bit of a teacher's pet, and he happened to mention that his mom was forcing him to go on this camp. And I overheard that, and the Lord just dropped something into my heart, and I very reluctantly had to talk to him because I thought he was below me at the time. But I said, "Listen, you should go on this camp. You'll have a great experience." I didn't say anything else, but he then said, "Okay, I'll go on the camp if you go on the camp." And now I was perplexed, and I was like, "Oh, I don't like this guy. I don't want anything to do with him." But then I just felt like I had to do it, so I said I'd go on the camp with him, and on that camp, he had an experience with God and came to start walking a road with the Lord, and became one of my closest friends for many seasons. And I feel like on that camp, it was through a series of different experiences and teachings and moments in Scripture. I had the curtain pulled back on where I was in a lot of ways, and had the Lord reveal to me that I was pursuing, climbing the wrong ladders, and that was always going to end in me not feeling fulfilled, no matter how high I climbed. And so, but I felt God also in His grace and kindness also validate my longing to give myself to something, and He affirmed to me that I was designed for intimacy with Him, and that my heart's longings were meant to be directed towards just knowing God deeper and coming to understand how I was known by God in a deeper way, and that would be the only thing that would ever leave me satisfied. The yearning that I was aware of deep in my heart that was causing me to be climbing these social ladders or whatever it is. It was this clear moment of saying, that was designed to be directed towards me. But coupled with that was a very strong sense of affirming that there was going to cost everything as well. And so I think, similar to a lot of people who come from charismatic, westernized sort of churches of origin, we love this idea of Jesus as our savior, because who doesn't like getting free stuff, and this idea that we're saved by grace and not by works is just a wonderful thing for us. And
It's like a fire insurance plan almost.
yeah, absolutely. It's like this. Who wouldn't want this? But we struggle with the concept of lordship, and bringing ourselves under the lordship of Christ is just not something that's taught on with as much depth, or as frequently. But I feel like that was very clearly sort of revealed to me at that moment, was that was the key as well. It's like me submitting to the lordship of Christ was the way that I was going to satisfy the longings of my heart. And I think there was a lot of being cautioned of counting the cost, and knowing that it was going to cost me everything. At that time, with a clear understanding that it meant stepping away from all the other things that I'd picked up in terms of caring about what people thought of me, trying to chase popularity, giving myself to success in the eyes of the world, whether it was on a sporting or academic front. But in that counting the cost, it was almost like I found myself in the passage of the teaching on the high road that leads to life. And anyway, at the end of the week, I just knew that I had no choice. That there was really, I felt like I was at that point where the disciples were at, where I didn't really understand. It was, post the feeding of the 10,000, and the Sermon on the Mount. There's this crowd that's been following Jesus, and they are in awe of his teachings, and then he lands it with saying that that they're going to need to eat his body and drink his blood, and it just scatters the crowd. 10,000 who've just seen all these miraculous signs and wonders and have been taught by the Messiah, are scattered by. And so it's a pretty groundbreaking teaching. And he turns to his disciples and says, "Are you guys not going to go with him?" And they just say, "Jesus, where would we go?" And they don't understand it, but it's almost like they know too much. It's sort of a red pill, blue pill moment, if anybody's a fan of the Matrix. And so similarly, I just, in that moment, I was like, well, I know that there's nothing else that will, that there's only one real choice for me. And so yeah, so that was the choice that I think has defined my life since then, and it was a series of a series of situations where I come back to that time and time again, and in the midst of me not understanding what's happening contextually around me, I feel that there's this opportunity to always choose Jesus, especially when I don't know what that's going to look like. But there's such peace that I have in being able to understand this concept of lordship that I don't need to understand, because there is someone higher than me, with more substance and authority, to whom I can defer when it comes to decision making. And so that's actually quite a comforting thing. And we think we love the idea of control, but actually it's a beautiful thing to know the character of God, and to understand that we get given the opportunity to trust it over ourselves. And so control is a beautiful thing to let go of in light of a revelation of who Jesus is.
That's really cool. Eric, one of our listeners, asked a question, which is recently I got into an accident, had a really bad concussion, and broke my leg. How do I not go on the wrong path through this trial? So I guess the question would kind of be phrased down. Things happen in life. Maybe he was planning for this to be his career somewhat, or maybe not as deep as that. But I know you've had a few trials in your life that I think might help answer this question. So
Yeah. So Eric, I mean, I resonate with your pain a lot, and I guess firstly, I'd like to say that in these conversations, I think we can really romanticize suffering in a lot of ways, but suffering sucks. So I think that's actually probably a lot more of an offensive term to Americans than it is to South Africans.
suffering sucks.
Yeah, I'll say suffering really is just something nobody wants to go through. It is a necessary part of Christian discipleship. But firstly, I would say that allow God to meet you in that pain, because He does every single time. When we're in the arms of a loving Father, we can rest assured that He sees us and He knows us, and it's not about getting onto the right path first off. The entry point to that path often is showered in in God just validating our experiences. And so I'm really sorry that you've got to go through that. I said that I thought my calling was to be playing rugby. And when I was at the end of, also during my grade 8 year, I found out that I had a degenerative condition in my spine where my vertebrae were losing shape because of too much impact, because I was playing too much sports whilst growing. And so I was told that I could never play rugby again. And at that stage, it was the most heartbreaking thing I ever experienced. Looking back, it sounds a bit trivial, but at the time, I really thought that this was my calling. It was what I wanted to make into my career. I'd found a lot more success on the sporting field than I had in any other realm at that stage, and it was devastating. And I remember for a week I was clinically depressed. If I look back on it now, just not eating, not wanting to speak to anybody, and so. But that was also, in the midst of all of that as well, I think God came to use that as an opportunity, retrospectively, where I realized that He was starting to allow me to have these little moments of being able to trust Him. And when we are in positions where we've got a lot of privilege, the big thing that we need to first embrace is God taking us on this journey of figuring out control. And so, with privilege and with the opportunities that we have, we tend to have coupled to that a very high value for control, being in control of our circumstances, controlling the things that are in our lives that are blessings, that do bring us, our income or whatever the case may be. That idea of lordship is based on submitting control ultimately to somebody who's above us. And so, Eric, I'd say, I don't know what your path looks like, but I know that God absolutely has you in the palm of His hand. And in the midst of trying to reconcile what the route forward looks like, start by I guess rooting yourself in what you do know and the promises that God has made universally to you, and there's multiple scattered through Scripture. But I think this is, if nothing else, an amazing opportunity to allow God to prove His faithfulness to you. He is the source of our provision. And Mother Teresa said that we'll never know that Jesus is all we need until Jesus is all we have.
Mm.
And unfortunately, there's in people with people who have access to a lot of their basic material needs being covered and sorted out. There's not that many opportunities that we have to be able to acknowledge that Jesus is all we need, because we tend to have our provision taken care of. So, yeah, and I'd say that allow yourself to trust the process in this, to trust the journey that God is inviting you to go on as you try and make sense of suffering. It's one that you'll, I think, join the rest of us on in terms of trying to figure out for the rest of your life. But I know that there is always assurance that God's provision always outweighs our need, and that is in its holistic way, not just our material needs, but our emotional needs, our spiritual needs, our relational needs. And so, I really would encourage you to lean into just allowing God to shape you in the season through this seemingly terrible experience.
Mm.
Yeah.
Where do you think you've gained that knowledge and that insight? And that it's almost a lifestyle in the sense of
Yeah.
like knowing that.
Yeah. So for me, it's been through a series of, of valuing certain things in my life and then having them stripped away. And so uh, I like to think of it as what seemed like a terrible series of unfortunate events that has actually become this beautiful snowball. And so what started with my diagnosis of Sherman's disease with my back, not being able to play rugby, led to a series of it seemed to become this thread that was pulled through my life, where there'd be something that seemed to be a good thing, and it was sort of pulled from me. And it was always insignificant at first, if I look back on it now, whether it was certain opportunities to I don't know, go on certain trips, or certain positions at school that went to people that I felt were less deserving than me, or just things that felt like they were a big deal at the time, but in the context of bigger things, actually weren't really. And then just before I was in my final year of high school, at that stage I'd just written my first set of SATs, done really well. My plan was to go to Harvard to study medicine, probably just for the status more than anything else. I wouldn't have said it at the time, but I got the SAT goal that I was looking for, and at that stage was rowing as well, and rowing was going to be one of the crutches I used to sort of get in there. And
Into Harvard?
into Harvard. I would have settled for any of the Ivy Leagues, but Harvard was what I was going at, and I was on track from a trajectory point of view with my rowing times and whatnot, and then I was diagnosed with high blood pressure at the age of 17, which was very strange. You don't get high blood pressure usually when you're sort of 17. So I went through all the workup. They couldn't find a cause, but they did find that it was worsened by high intensity sports, and so I wasn't able to row anymore at that stage. Which so then that was the first of the big significant ones. I thought was now I can row, and so that changed my. But in that process as well, I was offered the opportunity to be going to Dartmouth, and then realized that my intentions were wrong on that front anyway, and so felt again, and it was in that stripping away of something. God revealed to me a big part of my heart, which was to be loving and serving those who were downcast and in need, and I realized that there was a huge opportunity to do that in South Africa. So I decided I wanted to actually start my studies here in South Africa. So did that, and then when I was in my 5th year of medical school, because it's 6 years here, not four. I, yeah, tragically lost my father. And that was, I mean, yeah, very unexpected. He was the rock in my life and the rest of my family's life. We were a very close family. He was an incredible example and man of God. And yeah, that was then coupled by soon thereafter, within the next year or so, I was in a relationship with a woman who I'd been dating for sort of 6 years, and we were engaged, and then that also ended tragically with a lot of unexpected turns of events, and so once again thrown into this like deep spiral of just suffering that I couldn't really make sense of, that completely changed the context of what life looked like for me at the time. Um, and to be honest, I just feel like I've just broken the surface of that as well. You know, the trajectory changed a while ago, but once again, I can say with clear eyes that's the blessing that has come to me from those two events in the season is so much more than I could have ever have imagined. And yeah, and I've got so much more of a tender appreciation for God's faithfulness to me through it all. And so, yeah, the similar, I guess it's been these arcing trends of suffering leading to blessing. Yeah,
I mean, when you say your father died and blessing came from that, like I feel like a lot of people would hear that
mm,
and be like, "What? How
mm,
does that even work?" Like to even think
mm,
about, saying that. I mean,
mm,
obviously, is there something more you would like to share there?
yeah, yeah. Man, it's a long story. I'm sure my sister will also probably touch on it. I mean, it's
Yeah.
been, and I don't want to, again, I don't want to romanticize suffering. It's been, you know, it's been terrible in a lot of ways. Because yeah, and I think everything else has very quickly there's been a sense of any other suffering that I've had in my life has that very quickly there's been other opportunities that have come off the back of it, or that have led to my life looking better because of it. And this is very different. I I still feel like, and I just in a lot of big moments where I would usually seek his insight and advice, and ministry related things, business related things, career related things. It does still feel like I'm drowning a bit, and in no way being as effective or as impactful as I would be if I had his counsel and his input. And I just miss his friendship. We just had such a beautiful friendship, and he was just such a beautiful, um, like person who modeled Jesus in so many profound ways. So I miss him all the time, and that hasn't ever felt like my net gain has been more than my net loss, even closely. But I think it's brought me a perspective that I would never have been able to get from anything else, and that's that that's no matter how good things are this side of eternity, there is still there's still more brokenness in this world than we can ever hope to try and offset with blessings, and that we're invited to be a part of the redemption and restoration of a broken creation that's been twisted and warped by sin. But those processes will only be completed in the new kingdom, and in the new heaven and the new earth. And so I think it's been the experience that has finally given me perspective on on Paul's teaching when he says that for me to live as Christ and death is just gain. And I don't know, reading that, I was like, that's a bit of a dark teaching, my bro, Paul. I don't know if you were really on it for this, because there's beautiful things in this life, and there are, and it's wonderful things to be invited into, yeah, to what God is doing in a broken world around us. But that's where the beauty lies. And for me, it's the same thing. The most beautiful moments that I've experienced have been in a lot of ways tainted, when I'm like, there's a depth of suffering that I feel like I know and will wear for the rest of my life. That's completely changed my perspective. Like, no matter how beautiful things are, it's never going to offset this pain in this area, and that's okay. I wouldn't say that I'm transfixed on it. The Lord's taken me through it. I know that His faithfulness to me is always more than enough. But I know that, yeah, that I guess it's detached me from the world in a way that has been refreshing, where I feel like I'm able to be present, but there is attachment that's broken where, whatever happens here, I'm okay with it. My hope is not in this world, or what it might bring, not in this lifetime, and the experiences I might have, and when suffering inevitably comes back, it's still gonna be the worst thing ever at the time. But I feel like I've just changed my allegiances. It feels like I've got no allegiance to this world. On like a deep soul level, my hope is in the eternity to come, and in the day where the redemption and restoration that have marked the most beautiful moments of my life, when all of those processes get to see their completion in Christ. And yeah, so that would be the yeah. It's difficult
I can imagine.
to explain, but I think that's where the yeah. And I mean, that being said as well, there's also these tangible ways that it's allowed me to it's made me aware of the need for community and to be sharing my life with people, and very practically the roles that my dad played in my life, I've had to sort of redistribute those to the people around me, and so that's deepened the relationships that I've needed to rely on, and so it's galvanized our community in a very beautiful way. It's taken me to new depths in my friendships, in my relationships with my family, which has also been a beautiful blessing. And so there's practical ways as well that it's blessed me, and I've never known lack still to this day. Any time where I've had a need, the Lord has provided, and yeah, that's so significant.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, having the perspective you do, would you say that your plans and God's plan feel very aligned right now?
Yes, I'd say so. I think what I mean, 3 years ago, I had very clear. I mean, I'd been walking with Jesus for a long time, was along the path of my discipleship, and I had a very clear idea of what my life would look like in the next sort of 5 to 10 years. I would say 3 years ago, probably 4 years ago was the moment where that all shifted, and that obviously none of that, everything that I hung those details on, have completely like changed. So I'd say in that I also got a bit tired of trying to make plans, because I'd make plans for my life and I thought they were good plans, and then they would just be torn down like in different seasons by different things. And so eventually I was just like, I don't know what it's good to work towards things, God, but like, you got to give me something to work with here, because every time I think I'm onto something, you just not change your mind, but it's like, I'm wrong. And so I think, but I've come to realize that, again, my paradigm was really incorrect previously, where I had this upward mobility that was informing how I saw my life, where I was like, I need to be moving, just because I wasn't chasing after material things, I was still chasing after trying to, what I would call, steward my life for the kingdom in the best way and get to the highest point possible with my career, and really chase after success in what I set my hand to, and use that as the metric of like my success. And actually, I've come to change the way I think about those things, and now I think about my life as needing to be more downwardly mobile, where the further I move through my life, the more I want to give of myself to people around me, at the necessary expense of career ambitions and all these other things. And so that's shaped my thinking, and I realize the only good thing that I've ever set my hand to has been me partnering with whatever God is already doing in this world. And so I don't need to be the genesis point of fixing what's broken. I just need to try and tap into the redemptive, restorative processes that God is already at work and doing in the world around me, and that the world's problems are far more nuanced and big than I could ever try and tackle holistically by myself, which is how I used to think about things. I'd be like, cool, poverty, how are we going to solve this, God? And so I think I've arrived at the point where, in order for me to steward what I've been given well, I've got to be very open-handed and non-focused on what the scale of that looks like, and be a lot more focused on just trying to be present to the processes that are happening internally, the person I'm being formed into being, because from that will every measure of good things flow. So I think at this stage, I'm set on trying to follow Jesus with all parts of my life and my schedule, and to do that within the context of a godly community, and to trust that from the abundance of that, the good things will flow in terms of career or whatever else. But the fixation point should never be, I think, the career endpoints in and of themselves, because those become distractions and idols thereafter. But I'm starting to also recognize what it looks like in my life to be an agent of redemption and restoration and reconciliation in the midst of the brokenness that I find all around me, and starting to learn how to tap into those things.
Okay.
Yeah, if that
I mean,
makes sense.
so I was at your wedding, and I felt very blessed to be there. I mean, you're such a strong, tight knit family, and I'm a bit more of an outsider. So it was really cool to be able to experience that type of environment. And one of the things that stood out was just essentially, I mean, the legacy you've already started with people, coming up and talking about you and your wife and how you've led them to either a deeper understanding of their creator, or just like, being a very essential, vital point in their life to change their trajectory towards truth and life. And it's just so inspiring seeing all the things you've already done. You're very humble about it, but the mission trips you've been on, leading huge medical, I don't know about huge, but like big medical teams at the point in your life where you were at, and being able to, impact the world with seemingly, not a huge amount of resources. How does someone do that, or how does someone tap into that type of life, I guess, is the question.
Yeah. So it's funny. Yeah, it's a great question. I'm just laughing because, yeah, there's been moments where I guess you can put a metric on the sort of success of what you've sort of, I guess, set your hand to, but in my mind it's I guess the necessary entry point towards all of those experiences was not actually was being detached from like those sorts of outcomes, which is interesting. So yeah, I think I'd say the legacy that talking about legacy, it's an interesting concept, and in a lot of ways, my father was a first generation believer, follower of Jesus in his family, and that completely changed the trajectory for his family line from there on afterwards. And I'd say my mother was also a first generation active follower of Jesus in a very like hands-on way of also acknowledging Jesus' lordship. So the legacy that we get to start as the Sinclairs, I think, it starts from the fact that the curses were broken there, and that we're really continuing what they have laid before us in beautiful ways. And so my father was a remarkable man. He was a very high impact, very inspirational, very influential man, and just was also able to bring people to these moments of significant connection to Jesus, in all sorts of spaces where they wouldn't necessarily have those. So in the business space, a lot of ministry related stuff as well, and so I think that's been the substance of like the spiritual DNA that I think has been handed on to me. And so in a lot of ways I'm picking up on the legacy that he has started, and as is the rest of my family. We've had a lot of beautiful moments of being able to solidify that, with the context of my siblings and my wife, my brother's wife. That this is part of like what we're sort of trying to continue as a Sinclair heritage. But yeah, I think in terms of the rest of my life, anything that's that you can put a metric to, has just it's just been God, just being God in a lot of ways. I think I've just showed up, and again, I think the moments of what seem like significant outpourings where, we mobilize, part of mobilizing 5,000 people to a country to, set and setting up 10 medical clinics, whatever the case may be, which seems sort of impressive and exciting in and of themselves, or various different mission trips we've done to Africa or around Central America, or whatever the case may be. Those I think can become unhelpful distractions when we try and think of them as the goal point. And actually, like, the significance is that God can and wants to use all of us for something significant. We just need to let Him do that, and we need to let Him also change our thinking of what is significant or not as well. So we've got to trust that whatever it is that He calls us to or invites us into, that there's significance in that. And actually, like, when we talk about the kingdom, I think we're invited to be agents of seeing the kingdom become a present tense reality in and through our lives, and that's the most significant thing that we can ever be a part of. And I think there needs to be a necessary acknowledgement of how we fit in the order of those things, and we're just joining in what God is already doing, and never trying to sort of take lead or take point on any big things, because otherwise that's inadvertently putting ourselves in the position of God, and we're setting ourselves up to fail. And so, yeah, I think anything that's sort of been significant that's come from my life has come from this place of me continually needing to hand everything over to God and be like, take it all. And I found myself like just face flat on my knees at the foot of the cross most days, where significant things have just happened. And so I think it's in surrendering everything to God is really the necessary soil for any of these seeds to sort of be planted.
What does that practically look like, surrendering to God?
So I'm trying to give. So I guess it's difficult to get away from it. I'd say it's orientating every part of our lives, of our weeks, around intimacy with Christ. I think it's being able to let Him first and foremost. People at different stages of their walks with Jesus, but at every stage, if you're new in your faith, it's being able to let God reshape every area of your life. And if you've been walking for a while, it's letting God. Is trying to find intimacy with God in the context of every moment of your life. And so what's been pivotal to us is this idea of practice-based discipleship, and it's this idea of spiritual formation. And so we're being formed by whatever we give our time and money and effort into, whatever content we're consuming, the media that fits in with our preference. Those things are forming us into someone. They are having a quite a crucial role in shaping us into the people that we're becoming. And the invitations of Jesus are to allow Him to be the primary source of shaping, I think. And so practically, that requires a lot of careful work and attention, because we live in a digital economy where everything is vying for our attention. And so I think the central invitation for followers of Christ in 2023 is to try and orientate every moment of our weeks and our schedules around discipleship to Jesus. Because if we look at the way that Jesus walked with His disciples, in the ancient Near East, there was a very different economy of knowledge exchange, where apprenticeship was a central model that was used, wherein you didn't go to university or college to try and gain knowledge. You spent time with people who were doing certain things. So to become a blacksmith, you spend time with a blacksmith to become like that blacksmith, to eventually do what that blacksmith does. And that's the invitation that Jesus gives to his disciples and to us as well, is to be with Him, to become like Him, to ultimately do what He did. And so I think practically myself, my wife, my community, we have identified that throughout the rest of our lives, we have got to very carefully craft every moment of our schedule to try and facilitate intimacy with God, so that we can bring ourselves into an awareness of and connection to the Spirit of God, so that formation can be taking place. And that comes through a lot of times living like Jesus lived, which is which would largely be classified as spiritual disciplines or practices or habits, whatever you want to call it. We've done a lot of deconstructing of a lot of those traditions in our recent time, but we've really thrown the baby out with the bathwater, I think, in a lot of ways when we have moved away from the ways that Jesus lived in order to facilitate intimacy with his Father. I hope maybe that's a more helpful answer.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Obviously we could talk on forever on a host of topics,
Yeah.
but I think we'll wrap it up with some barking. And I don't know, is there any books or any type of thing someone can go read or study that you think really benefited you in your life, maybe around the ages of 18 to 20, that life stage?
Yeah, hugely. So the big one, I'd say, Renovation of the Heart by Dallas Willard. It was a really, really good entry point for me into a lot of different things. So Renovation of the Heart is always great. If you're wanting to get onto more of an understanding of, I think, a theology of a God who knows us and loves us. So from an identity point of view, God Has a Name by John Mark Comer is pretty powerful. And then if you're looking to get into some of the practice-based discipleship things, some of the spiritual formation stuff, a really great entry point for that is Invitation to a Journey by Robert Mulholland. So those three books, I think, will start a series of spirals in your lives that will never stop in really good ways.
Awesome.
I'm in that free fall at the moment. So
Nice.
thanks for having me. Thanks.
Of course. Is there anywhere that you would want people, if they want to talk to you directly or see what you're doing, any places you recommend them going to, and we'll link it below? Or
So you can. The Americans don't use WhatsApp very much. It's this messaging platform that the rest of the world, other than China, uses. So that's where I mostly am. But happy to chat. At any point, my Instagram bio is Kyle.
We'll leave it below. Yeah.
Cool. And you can probably DM me on Instagram, and then I'll send you a link to download WhatsApp, and then we can chat on WhatsApp. Because it's easier. But iMessage as well. We can give you my iMessage, but happy to chat.
It's very generous of you giving those details away. Well, thanks so much for being on.
Thanks.
I hope this isn't the last episode that we have with you, because I think it's very cool, and it saves me a lot of talking, just listening, which is awesome. So we'll see you guys on the next episode, and
Great.
Just like and subscribe, I guess.
Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend of mine. I have a friend in Jesus. Jesus is a friend of mine. Jesus is my friend. Jesus is a friend.